When German soldiers on the Eastern Front chewed on bread harder than bricks, when Japanese soldiers on Pacific Islands gnawed raw on occupied corpses, American soldiers were already eating hot corn dishes. They even complained about having to eat lunch again. This wasn't just plain food. It was a real situation during World War II. Throughout the entire war, the United States delivered 43 million tons of supplies to the front lines. General Samwell alone consumed vast resources. This wasn't just simple combat rations. It was a war of calories launched by industrial assembly lines. The U.S. used massive amounts of canned goods, chocolate, and cigarettes to pave a road to victory through sheer supply. Today, I will tell you just how luxurious the U.S. military's rations were during World War II. There's a saying, amateurs look at tactics, experts look at logistics. What decides a war's outcome is never how brilliant the tactics are, but how strong the logistics are. Clearly, the U.S. was an expert at waging war. After Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the genius general of the Malaysian people, Bull, Lieutenant General Brehon Samwell, served as the highest commander of the U.S. Army's logistics system. He was responsible for integrating the U.S. military's logistics system. General Samwell, as a leader, immediately began establishing a unified logistics command system, the ASF. It centralized previously scattered procurement, production, transportation, warehousing, distribution, and facility construction. Almost all non-combat logistics functions were integrated under the ASF command. He personally coordinated and directed the entire logistics system. Under Samwell's guidance, the ASF collaborated with the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and food processing companies to conduct large-scale project research. They even established a dedicated military food and container research institute. Every day, they studied how to ensure frontline soldiers ate and drank well. Through continuous technological breakthroughs, dehydration, compression, and canning food preservation techniques were developed. Whether it was eggs, vegetables, or ice cream, the ASF found ways to dehydrate them. These were then used as new ration formulas for the troops. By the time the U.S. officially entered the war, the ASF had developed rations suited for different combat environments, A, B, C, K, and D types. Type A rations were hot meals prepared by field kitchens using fresh ingredients. They included fresh meat, vegetables, bread, coffee, and other rich varieties, not much different from domestic meals. However, due to battlefield conditions, these rations could only be enjoyed in rear areas with refrigerators and refrigerated trucks. They were available only at bases. When soldiers were at the front lines, they could only eat substitutes for Type A rations, Type B rations. These rations were heat processed and packed into 5-gallon cans. With field kitchen facilities, they could be simply heated and distributed directly to combat units. They didn't require complex refrigeration chains. They were hot meals designed for division-level units. When the Army fought in dispersed operations, soldiers couldn't even get Type B rations. They had to rely on Type C rations designed for individual soldiers. These rations consisted of 6 tin cans, including 3 meat and vegetable cans and 3 bread cans. They contained various items like stewed beef, meat and beans, ham and eggs, compressed biscuits, and more. Considering the mental needs of frontline soldiers, these rations thoughtfully included cigarettes, matches, chewing gum, drink powder, toilet paper, and other snacks or supplies. They covered every detail. When the U.S. military needed to operate without logistics support for highly mobile short-term combat, the logistics department would provide them with an upgraded version of Type C rations, Type K rations. These rations were individually packaged in cardboard boxes. And the types for breakfast, lunch, and dinner were all different. Breakfast was ham and eggs, canned biscuits, and jam. Lunch was cheese or meat paste, canned biscuits, sugar cubes, salt tablets, and juice powder. Dinner was sausage, canned biscuits, meat broth cubes, or chocolate. No cooking was required. They could be opened and eaten directly. It was very convenient. In addition to these 4 daily rations, the U.S. military also equipped an emergency energy replenishing Type D ration. This ration had no flavor to speak of. It was just a high-calorie chocolate bar. And to prevent soldiers from eating it as a snack, it was deliberately made to taste bad. So soldiers would only eat it when they were starving. This gave them the motivation to eat it. So it was also called dog food. In addition to the A, B, C, K, and D rations, there was one thing that made U.S. soldiers rave with excitement: Spam lunch meat. Spam lunch meat was originally developed by the U.S. to address the economic downturn as a cheap food. It used the least valuable parts of the pig, like the heart, as the base ingredient. Mixed with a certain proportion of flour and salt, it was emulsified and blended in a vacuum environment. This produced a vibrant-colored, finely textured, salty, and savory meat product. Its price was very cheap and attractive, selling for only 40 cents, half the cost of the same weight of fresh meat, or even less. It could provide nutrition and satisfaction comparable to fresh meat. So, upon its release, it caused a huge market response. It quickly became a life-saving ration for American families during the Great Depression. After the Great Depression ended, the U.S. economy improved, and Spam lunch meat gradually faded from the market. But the U.S. military keenly noticed that this tin-canned, inexpensive, small and lightweight, easy to store and transport long-distance, high-calorie instant food was simply the perfect military ration. So, during the entire World War II, the U.S. military procured over 700 million cans of Spam. This accounted for more than 70% of Hormel's total production. In 1942 alone, Hormel received over $43 million in orders from the military. They made a fortune. To ensure Hormel could stably supply Spam, the ASF specifically built a production system and transfer warehouses for them. Then, tens of millions of Spam cans were loaded onto trains and trucks, transported to ports on the east and west coasts, and loaded onto Liberty ships and cargo vessels, becoming a key part of U.S. military rations. From then on, U.S. soldiers were stuck with Spam. Whether on the Pacific or European battlefields, and whether in Type B or Type C rations, Spam was always there. Over time, U.S. soldiers grew to hate this lunch meat. They felt nauseous just seeing it. They not only used it to clean guns and shine boots, but also gave it derogatory names like slime meat or sagging meat to vent their frustration. These names were shocking to hear. They expressed their discontent. This resentment was also reflected among U.S. military leaders. The Allied Supreme Commander, Eisenhower, said to Hormel's president after the war, "For the past 4 years, like millions of other soldiers, I was fed up with Spam. I must admit, I was a bit tired of it. But even so, I still have to thank you for providing Spam. Without it, I really don't know how we would have fed our troops." U.S. soldiers complained as they did, but they had to admit that Spam lunch meat, as a cheap source of meat, played an irreplaceable role in World War II. Without it, the global anti-fascist war might have lasted much longer. Who knows how many more lives would have been lost to achieve victory? As the ancients often said, without honey, one must make do with frost. For U.S. soldiers, Spam lunch meat was their sustenance. For countries like Britain and the Soviet Union, which faced severe supply shortages, it was a lifesaver. Without Spam, the U.S. might have had breakfast meat or dinner meat. But if the Soviet army lacked Spam, how could they have survived the hellish Eastern Front, suffered defeat after defeat, and yet stood up again each time, ultimately counterattacking to Berlin? In short, the logistical supply capabilities shown by the U.S. in World War II marked an unprecedented display of industrial and logistical power in human warfare history. It redefined the standards for material support in modern warfare. It proved that the outcome of modern wars depends not only on frontline tactics and courage, but also on the nation's ability to mobilize production forces, organizational efficiency, and transportation capabilities. The outcome of wars is no longer solely determined by combat strength and willpower. It depends on how many troops can be transported, how many days of attack intensity can be sustained, and how many forward bases can be established. While German soldiers in Stalingrad chewed on frozen black bread and Japanese soldiers on Guadalcanal suffered from malaria and starvation, U.S. soldiers were complaining about the taste of Spam and the supply of ice cream. This stark contrast was not only material, but also psychological and spiritual. This tells us that true strength is not just a sharp spear, but an unbreakable shield and a bottomless warehouse. It's not just the wisdom to decide where to fight, but the ability to continuously,